Thank you, Ms. Zoom, who keeps telling us who is the clockwork that we run by, is the woman who tells us that these events are being recorded or not.
But did you? And you did thank her. You thanked her.
Oh, I thanked the robot.
That was the answer.
That was it. So we will be heading straight on, and we are very lucky to be joined by Judith Nemeth. Julia invited Judith several months ago, and Judith we were delighted to be able to fill this afternoon slot on the big teaching and learning day with someone with so much experience as Judith. So Judith will be talking to us today about how to build that crucial, that non-robot, that entirely human element of learning and teaching and learning, which is relationship building. As a brief introduction, because I don't want to be talking myself, I want to let Judith get into what she has to say. Judith is the founder of Darko and the CEO of the Lubavitch Multi-Academy Trust in North London. So Darko was set up by Judith in 2010, and since then has delivered high quality training programs to a huge network of teachers, educators, and parents across the kind of education landscape. And really, these training programs form the basis of understanding for these educators around behavior, around learning, and around development in children. And Judith will be talking a little bit about her experiences with Darko. But alongside this, Judith was also appointed, as I mentioned, head of Lubavitch MAT, which is a collection of 3 schools in North London, in April of this year. So those are the 2 angles with which Judith will be talking to us today. And Judith will be taking us through her expertise in education and psychology, and centering really on what it means to build an effective relationship in learning and the struggles that children can face in the absence of this relationship. So, as I've said before, without further ado, because it's important to introduce our speakers, to give them some context. Judith, welcome to the stage.
Thanks very much indeed. And I think, Julia, when you invited me, I had no idea I would be running a multi-academy trust. June seemed ages away, but I'm glad I've been able to fulfill this. I wonder if I could change the layout of the screen and see everybody rather than having spotlights. Is that possible? As it was before, because I just like to see people.
If you go, we've removed the spotlight.
Oh, is it mine?
Yeah, if you go to the top right in the view, you can click gallery. Yeah.
Much better. Oh, that's much better. If you could put your screens on, I'd really appreciate it. Because I'm looking at you and I'm looking at your reactions, and like any professional teacher, I'm picking up the messages from your expressions and from your reactions. I was once giving a course and a woman was folding the laundry while she was on the course, so it was a bit difficult to find out whether she was engaging or not. But that really does help me to be able to help you. First of all, I'm not excusing the background noise. As you can hear, my office overlooks the playground. I've got the best seat in the house because you can pick up so much from watching pupils when they don't know they're being watched, also informally and with social interaction. But I apologize if it intrudes, and do tell me if you can't hear what I'm saying. The title, The Importance of Relationships, Building Relationships with Your Students, was given to me, but it's something that I'm very passionate about, because without a relationship, your teaching, your education, your tutoring is going to be limited. It's interesting that we've just come from looking about thinking and robots, etc. As Ludo said, if you were a robot, you wouldn't be forming a relationship. You could be learning something, and I'm very much a proponent of AI in education, of artificial intelligence, but the computer that responds to the child and targets them according to their ability, etc. However, that too is limiting. About 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I was running a teacher training college. And then computers, that's how old I am, were just kind of coming into the fore. And the discussions then were, and I remember somebody did it as her thesis, the final thesis, will computers replace teachers? Can't remember what she said, but the fact is they will never, ever, ever replace teachers. They will enhance teaching. I think there's an awful lot that they can do if we use them properly, but we will always need teachers. Now, I'm very mindful that I'm talking to tutors, and I'm not sure whether your tutoring, probably till now, most of it's been done online, or whether it's done one-to-one, but I'm going to say that in any milieu, whichever format you're using, I'm going to try and show you how it's really important to form a relationship. So where did this come from? So when I started in teacher training, as I said, when I had my first child, had done a parenting course, and it opened my eyes to Adlerian psychology that's based on Freud. That really gave me an insight, not into the child, into myself, into how I controlled and monitored my own behavior was going to be reflected in the children's behavior. And I found it very, very effective. And as Julia very kindly said earlier, she did too. And when I came to be running a teacher training college, there were lots of courses on classroom management. And this is what you do. This is the best way to go about this particular problem. But there was nothing, sorry, I haven't told them that I'm doing this. There was nothing that gave an insight to teachers into the why. Why are children misbehaving? Why do they think their conversation is more important than what you're saying? Why are some children not learning? And I felt that the psychology that I had developed could be applied to teachers. So I created this program that became the Darko program, together with a therapist, a psychologist, psychotherapist. And we did this together, and there was very much the pull and the thrust of, this is about education. No, it's about psychology. No, it's about education. No, it's about psychology. And it really enabled me to formulate the program fusing those two disciplines. But the essential message of those disciplines, and I can hear my colleagues saying it to me, Judith, it's all about the relationship. If there's no relationship, the education is going to be limited. And he's 100% right. So that's where this journey started. Just to cut a long story short, the student teachers went out into schools, told the class teachers what they'd been learning. The class teachers came and said, we didn't have that in teacher training college. Can we do your course? So they came and did the course. And then I started getting comments like, yeah, it was really good in the classroom, but my parenting has just gone through the roof. And so now it's a parenting course and a teacher training. So why is forming a relationship so important? I want to move to the side for a minute and look at learning and look at levels of learning, levels of engagement in learning. there are 3 levels of that engagement and that imbibing the learning. There is shallow, there is deep, and there is profound. What we're doing here, I'd like to think it's deep, but it's shallow. We're just paddling in the shallow end because the superficial, initial listening to somebody teaching something might have some impact, but it's limited. It's maximum up to the knees. It's not really going to change the person. It could put you on a track, on a journey to investigate more, but it won't change your life. So the teaching that you're doing one-on-one on an initial level is only shallow. They might learn what you're teaching them. They'll learn their fractions and their timetables and punctuation, but they won't learn how to learn. And they won't learn how to transfer the information. And it won't become a part of them, because for them also, it's only shallow. So how do we go from shallow learning to deep learning? And how do we go from deep to profound? And what's the definition of deep and profound learning? So shallow learning we've explained, it's information. I might learn that information or hear that information. Will I retain it? Probably not unless I revisit it. You know, the 3 R's of remembering. Remember, remind, reinforce. Okay? So the shallow learning won't go very far if you don't remember it again at the end of the lesson. You remind them after 24 hours and reinforce after 7 days. That is clinically been proven a way of really helping children remember facts. But we're only talking about facts. So that's all shallow. A deeper level of learning is when I can use the information. So not only learn it and retain it, but actually apply it elsewhere. So the concept of times tables, the concept of punctuation. It's so interesting because I did a spell of teaching year 6 for 4 years. Most of my teaching career has been in secondary school. And opportunities came up in primary school, and I taught year 6. I've then been teaching for about 20 years at least. And I realized I became numerate at 40. Because all the maths that I had learned, and I got grades, I think I got an A or B in maths O level, was all regurgitating. I really didn't understand it at all. But in order to be able to teach a numeracy lesson, I had to understand what this was about. This wasn't about adding and subtracting times tables. This was much more. This is deep. This is a deeper level of learning. Transference of skills, transference of knowledge, being able to apply. The next level, profound learning, is when you don't even know that you know it. A lovely quote I picked up, forgive me, I don't know where it's from. Education is what's left when all that's learnt has been forgotten. Education is what's left when all that's learnt has been forgotten. It's that internalization that makes you a person, that makes you who you are. That's education. Now, you might turn around to me and say, but I only want to teach timetables. This kid's got to pass their SATs, their GCSEs, and you know what? I don't need to form a relationship. Well, okay, that's your choice. It's a shame. So that's one reason why you need to form a relationship. The second reason why we need to form a relationship is about what that relationship could do. I know, and it's been thrown at me lots and lots of times, that a teacher is not expected to be a psychologist. You're a teacher, you go in there and teach, and that's the end of it. But it's actually not true. Because if we don't bear in mind and be mindful of the fact that children are fragile, mental and emotional health is real, and if we ignore the fact that the importance of strong emotional health, healthy self-esteem, is directly related to outcomes of learning, then we're missing a trick. Now, the essence of helping a child's self-esteem is helping them find their place positively. Once children know that they belong, whether it's in their family or in the classroom or with their social group or with their tutor, that gives them a grounding. Now, children who are coming for tutoring, I'd like to bet the bottom dollar that 75% of them do not have a strong, positive place in the classroom. Maybe that's a bit of an overestimation, but it's a lot. They don't feel their place in the classroom, absolutely. So therefore, as tutors, you could play a really, really important role. And at the end of the day, wouldn't it be great if a child became successful because of your tutoring, not because they passed their GCSE, but because you made them feel important. You established a relationship. You helped them to feel good about themselves. You found their positives and you built and developed their positives. You know, self-esteem is sometimes a bit, I know we just had a definition now, which was a lovely one, capable and lovable. I'd like to give a different definition, and I'd like to see this cup. This cup, this polystyrene cup, is empty of self-esteem. And if I leave this cup on the end of my desk and I open the window, whoosh, it'll blow over. There's nothing to ground this cup. However, if I start to fill this cup up with self-esteem, then already I'm more grounded. I'm solid. You can't knock me over. I'm listening. And our aim as teachers and tutors is to not only fill that cup of self-esteem, which is really good, then it could be as windy as you like, it probably won't go over, but actually carry on once it's full. Because if you carry on once it's full, you create what we call the overspill effect. When the cup is full, children will try what they think they can do. If you go beyond and get as far as the overspill effect, they will allow themselves to go out of their comfort zone, which is what you need your tutees to do, because they're worried and they're scared and they have failed somewhere along the line and they're very scared of their failure, and it's not a nice feeling. Nobody likes to fail. So that's the second reason why establishing this relationship in order but you're building the self-esteem, and they're not only solid in what they can do, but actually you can take them beyond, is absolutely brilliant. Any questions, challenges, comments so far? Just unmute yourself if you can. I'm sure you can, and please feel free. No? Still crystal clear? Okay, fine. Let's carry on.
Wait. Sorry, Judith, hold on. Amanda was just about to say something.
I was going to say,
and-
absolutely brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant idea. I work with children that have dyslexia, so they come to me when they're sort of last resort from school sort of place, and the whole start of my job is building their self-esteem and confidence, and knowing that actually they do have a skill and they can do, you know, they are good at something, if it's not, you know, and they just need that support. So it's just a really brilliant analogy. It's really good. Thank you.
Excellent, Amanda. Really appreciate it. Okay. So with my student teachers, and I'm going to be telling this to my teachers at the beginning, or before the beginning of next term as well, there are hard skills and soft skills. And what we tend to do as teachers and tutors is concentrate on imparting the hard skills and sidelining the soft skills. So what do I mean? If you're a teacher, and a lot of you are, and you have a class, you know that the more time and the more time and the more development you invest at the beginning of the first term in establishing boundaries and establishing routines and establishing what is and isn't acceptable in the class, the rest of the year will go swimmingly. They are in direct proportion. The longer you spend, the better the year will be. The shorter you spend, or I need to go in there and teach because that's and blah, 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 all these things are happening, you will all the year be trying to catch up what you didn't invest in at the beginning. So that's a class. In terms of one-to-one or a small group, the investment is in the relationship. And the time that you're going to spend, and I would actually put it in my time plan, or certainly be very mindful of it, at both at the beginning and at the end of your session, is an investment. We're going to look at the how in a minute. Because what you're doing there is starting to form that relationship, establishing trust, establishing security. You're going to establish things like no question is a silly question. Whatever is said in the room stays in the room. I'm not going to talk about things you tell me unless it's a safeguarding issue, and all kids know that nowadays. And do it. You know, don't then the mum phones you and say, how's Jimmy doing? And you tell them how Jimmy's doing and gone, that's it, lost it. So you're building up that trust, and you are designating time in your tutoring period of, I would say, at least 5 minutes at a bookend, at least. And if you find that the child wants to talk more, let them. It's not a waste of time. It could be a red flag, because there could be something that you maybe do need to investigate or find out further. But if they want to talk and you're not giving them their space, they're going to spend the rest of the time thinking, why doesn't she let me talk? I want to talk. So they're not listening to you anyway, so you haven't gained anything. We're not talking about lashes of time always, But we are talking about designating a certain amount of time. You're creating a safe space. In the Sunday Times, for the last 40 years, when I've been reading the Sunday Times and longer, there is a section at the back of the review section, and it's called A Life in the Day Of. And what they do is they take a personality and they interview them, and they're trying to show how their life is reflected in a day. And I started to see a pattern. And one thing I identified, because I like those, they're really interesting, was the interviewee always identifies the person who made them what they are. Because they always say, you know, if not for the PE teacher in secondary school, I wouldn't be where I am. If not for Uncle Bill, I wouldn't be where I am. They always, it's so interesting. Now, let's put that on the table. Children, particularly children who may be struggling with their self-esteem as well as their work, as well as their place where they belong, need somebody to believe in them. And you might be that person. And in 20 years' time, I might read A Life in the Day Of, and it will say, it was that tutor in love tutoring who really, and it really, really might be. Now, in Darko, by the way, is Hebrew, and it means according to his way, because we're told in the book of Proverbs, that we need to educate the child according to his way. That's the trouble nowadays. You know, it used to be, well, it isn't. It used to be one size fits all. Now there's so much differentiation. It's a lot better in that way. But we need to find out how that child learns, but that's another topic, in order that we can teach them in the way that they learn. So if we go out of our way to find out how they learn, we become what we call in Darko the person who. Everybody needs a person who. It's the person who believes in them. A person who believes in their potential, who believes in their success, who is willing them to succeed. Because as you said, Amanda, by the time they come to you, they've failed somewhere. And they're feeling awful and rejected and pathetic. Why do I need a tutor? So it's about rebuilding that confidence. It's more than that. It's about really, really believing in them. Because there's a magic that happens. When you really, really believe in a child, they start to believe in themselves. And if you can develop that self-belief, you've done everything. Because that will go further. This is the profundity of the relationship that you're developing. That, yeah, I can do it. Now, obviously, you would be ill-advised, and I'm sure you wouldn't, to set unrealistic expectations. That, oh, I know you can get an A, at level 9, when they're kind of skirting around a 3. That, you wouldn't do that. But it's about the realistic expectation. And at the end of this, I'm going to give you a technique on how to do that. Fabulous technique. I must remind myself to do that, sorry. But there are ways of doing it. So we've looked at the why relationships are so important, and then why relationships are so important to the actual child. Before I go on to the how, have we got any questions? but that's halfway through now. So you all want to know the how.
Shall we
Okay.
just check in and see if it's resonating with people, if they're with us? Charlotte, Miguel, Andrea, what are you thinking? Verity, tell us.
Well, I don't know.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Come on, Charlotte.
I would say that, yeah, sorry, two Charlottes. That I definitely one thing when people have seen me teach or tutor is that I have a key, that I'm very good at connecting and building that relationship. And I've always sort of in a way thought, oh gosh, is that the best thing? But the more, it's really good to hear sort of you validating how important it is, because I do feel the importance of sitting down and talking to the child and sort of, you know, getting to them, investing, I think, as you said, like investing that time, and what you get out of it in the long run is much more beneficial than not. So that was really, really good.
I guess it's also a bit of a balance though, because I had a group of students where they wanted to talk about their dinner or but I also had to get them to talk about maths and to understand what they were there for. Yeah, so it's just a bit of a balance, really.
It's just a bit of a balance. Maybe you should talk about maths in dinner. Use what they want to talk about. Kind of take them over to where you need to be. But yeah, thank you. That's nice.
And for my students, they're not. Most of them are actually quite progressive and quite, you know, highly advanced. Most of them aren't behind schedule at all. So for me, it's the other way.
That's interesting. So do you still think, though, it's important, Tripti, to establish a relationship? Or do you think
absolutely. That rapport and that friendship and that trust, so that, yeah, I mean, like when I had a drumming teacher, even if she said that's rubbish, you just cared for her so much that you didn't mind her saying it's rubbish and you just work harder for her. So yeah, the best results are with a good relationship. I'd agree, definitely.
Lovely, thank you.
Andrea, can we hear from you, please?
Yeah, I also get the same experience. Many of my students are overachieving already, but their parents want to do even better. So they want to get straight to the science, chemistry, and physics. And I slow them down. I try to slowly build up the relationship so that they can then feel safe to fail and get it wrong, because these kids really are pushed to their limits and they really want to do their ever best work all the time. And it's so nice when they fail and they learn from their mistakes, but they need to feel safe. And that comes from building the relationship, which I do it very slowly over time. And I get lucky enough to work for long periods of time with these kids. So I follow them through their key stage 3 and then into key stage 4 and sometimes towards key stage 5. So building relationships is really crucial for learning to overachieve. I learned from Dylan Williams. He said, why shall teachers want students to achieve their full potential when they can overachieve? And I use always that in my learning. I always tell my students, I want you to, when you feel ready, I want you to overachieve your full potential. And that is built over many sessions and many opportunities, building relationships.
That's lovely. In fact, you've identified an area that I hadn't put into the pot for this presentation, and that is highly able children, but also huge expectations and, might I say, pressure from parents and peers. But I would say that we've got a very important role there as well. As you say, allowing them to fail or not achieve will also be okay. Because if they're surrounded by these huge expectations and by what might be a disappointment of parents, teachers, head teachers, or whatever, you have become the safe space. You have given them the chance, the opportunity to maybe, if I don't make it, life will continue and it will still be okay. And therefore, their mental health there, you really are protected. Okay, thank you for that. That was really, really nice feedback, and thank you for facilitating that, Juliet. So how do we do this? So we've talked about bookends, and we've talked about talking about building their confidences. And we have a tool that we use in Darko, and that is, you can only build on a strength. You can't build on a weakness. Now you might say, well, obviously. Well, yeah, obviously. But if they're in a maths lesson and they're not getting it, and the teacher's teaching it again and again in the same way, then that's trying to build on a weakness. So what we need to do as tutors is find their strength. You know, if you're lucky enough to own a house and you want to do a loft conversion, so along comes the surveyor. The first place he looks is not in the loft, is on the foundation. I'll go to the foundations and say, well, I'm terribly sorry, madam. You've got cracks in your foundation. And if there are cracks, we cannot build that loft. So first, we have to underpin. We have to strengthen the foundation. So what's that analogous to in teaching and learning? I think it was somebody called Jim Novak from Canada who said, if the teacher teaches the same subject again and again and again in the same way over and again, who's the slow learner? And that's what we need to take on board. If a child hasn't achieved in being taught in that traditional way, then whether it's one-to-one or a small group, we now have the opportunity to find out the way the child learns. And when we find out the way the child learns, I'm not only talking learning styles, I'll expand in a minute, that is validating for the child. And then they not only feel good about themselves because you've helped them to find out how they can learn, you can then use that to represent the learning in a different way. So obviously there are, thanks, well, to Howard Garner and others, there are learning style preferences. You've got your visual learner, you've got your auditory learner, you've got your kinesthetic learner, and you've got your tactile learner. And that's basic. And I'm sure that you, in initial stages of building your relationship with a child, you try and find out what kind of a learner they are. It's very interesting. When I was researching this for Darko, I came across a very interesting piece of research that you can see whether a child is visual, auditory, or kinesthetic by the way, the direction of their eyes when you give a person a difficult question. If you challenge a child or an adult with a question and they are a visual learner, they'll look up. It's like they're looking for the answer. An auditory learner will look straight at you, probably because they're concentrating on deciphering what you're saying. A kinesthetic learner will look down. Maybe because they need to move around or they're going to trip over. Don't know why. Now, when I discovered that piece, that I happened to be meeting with a friend who's also a psychotherapist, and I was telling him about this fascinating piece of information that I found out. And he said, Judith, he said, in clinical practice, that's one of the first things that we learn. Look at the eye movement of the person. Because if you discover that they are visual learners, and in your psychotherapy sessions, you're just going to sit and talk to them, you're going to be there a long time. Isn't that interesting? So let's consider what type of learners they are, but you might not be able to see their eyes very well on Zoom. So ask them, what do they like to do? You know, do they like drawing? Do they like color? Do they like music? And then expand that to their whole learning environment. When you're teaching them, are they sitting still, or are they jumping around, or are they moving, or swinging on their chair? Are they clicking the pen, sucking their thumb, playing with slime? Have a look at what they're doing. And that will be the route in which you can get to their learning. Do they need to eat while they're working? You know, I'm not sitting here without my mug of coffee. My time is very limited if I don't have a cup of coffee next to me. There's the water, exactly. So one-on-one, in a classroom, it's quite hard to do this, but one-on-one, do it. Now, not only are you finding out about their learning, you're showing that they're important. You're showing that they're valued. I appreciate how you are. And there is no wrong way of learning. There really isn't. There is what's right for you. Now, some children will come to you convinced that the way they learn is wrong, is damaged, is inappropriate. And that's the rebuilding that you need to do. Just as an idea, what I do in the classroom to get this message across that there's no wrong way of learning, I always start off, particularly in primary school children, with the cereal game. What's a cereal game? Okay, teach you for the first time. What do you have for breakfast? Rice Krispies, no breakfast, porridge, toast, crunchy bar, whatever, right? Put them all on the board. And I match up Rice Krispies with Weetabix. And I match up no breakfast with toast or whatever. And I give them 2 minutes, and they've got to convince the other that their breakfast is better than the other one's. So they all go off, and it's great fun, and they have 2 minutes, bong, and it gets down. And then we ask them, who was convinced by the other person? Hardly anyone. And it's the same in learning. There is no better breakfast. It's what's best for you. And then I will go on to introduce the fact it's exactly the same in learning. So therefore, if you are an auditory learner, you better make sure you're recording this, number one, so you can listen to it again and again. I'm going to take your homework or your work that you have to do. You're going to talk me through it, or you're going to create a presentation, whatever. Now, again, you're not only improving the teaching and learning, you're validating them. Validation, as Charlotte just said, builds trust. Trust is the secure place that your children, your pupils need to get to in order to be able to learn from you. Now, so you're either finding out about who they are and what they are and how they like to learn. That's number one. The next thing is talk about yourself. They love hearing about you. Something that happened, make it up if you like. you know, it's a brilliant way of getting a class together. You know, if they're all something else, just start off by saying, do you know what happened to me on the way to school? Suddenly, everybody's quiet. So they love to hear about you. You don't have to reveal your most intimate details, but certainly tell them about you. And that will give them confidence for you to tell them about them. Sorry, for them to tell you something about themselves. Note it down. Next week, ask them about it. Wow, she remembered. She remembered that last week after the lesson I was going to go and play netball. I'm important. What I do matters. That's how you build a relationship. Now, I don't know what the boundaries are, and you have to set those boundaries in terms of communicating between sessions. But when you are setting those boundaries or resetting them, if you are meeting people weekly, it's a good idea to have a meeting point halfway. And that can be in whichever way is comfortable for you. Email, WhatsApp, text, whatever, anything on social media if you're comfortable with it. There have to be boundaries. You don't want them WhatsApping you all the time. But that touching base in the middle is the support for the relationship, because a week is quite a long time. And also it reminds them of what they have to do, how you're getting on. Oh, so therefore I'm important. The teacher really, really, really wants to know how it's going. Can I help you with anything? Anything, absolutely anything. But that touching base in the middle of the week really helps the relationship. That's another thing to do. Now, what, as we identified at the beginning, you can teach on a superficial level, but you want the deep dive. You want them to be able to have this transference of learning. They can only do that if it's profound, as you said, if it becomes part of them. So 10 minutes left, let's start to review. We've explored why the relationship is important, because if they feel that you are important to them, your work will be important to them. They will take it seriously because it matters. Relationships matter. The why is because they could be coming, and Andrea extended our vision of that. They could have been having challenging experiences that Amanda described, but also very, very high expectations. That's also very challenging. And actually those very high expectations can also stifle the learning. You know, the brain is a very, very responsive organ. And if there is too much stress, too much pressure, which can become a trauma, learning stops, absolutely stops. So we have an opportunity to balance that. We looked at shallow, deep, and profound learning. We looked at the overspill effect, the importance of developing self-esteem, the importance of making it so that they'll go out of their comfort zone, which they will with you. We looked at becoming the person who. I'm not going to ask the question, I'm going to tell you. You have the opportunity of becoming the only person who believes in their potential and their future and their success. You could be the making of them. And then we talked about trust, and we looked at different strategies of how to build that relationship. Before I conclude, what I'd like to hear from you is, how do you think you can apply anything of what we've covered in one or some of your tutoring relationship tomorrow? Anybody want to have a go? Yes, Amanda.
I certainly, it's something that I do anyway, but is, like you're saying, talk about yourself. For me, I very often will say to a student that I'm quite a slow reader, and that I have to reread something, because very often my students, they'll read something and they put so much energy into their reading that they haven't got a clue what they've just read. And I'll say, you know, I'm very much the same. I can read and I love reading, but I read slowly. And sometimes I have to read something, you know, 2, maybe even 3 times to really take it in and to really understand what I've read. But that's okay, you know, and that is okay. That's my way of learning.
That's right.
You know,
and if it's all right for you, then it's all right for me.
Yeah, so, you know, and it's okay if you've read something and you don't get it first time round. It's fine to go back to the beginning. It's better to go back to the beginning and start again than walk away not knowing what you've just read.
Yeah.
And it does, many of them, particularly my older students, it really does sort of resonate with them. So it's sort of, you know, picking up on my flaw, my vulnerability, I suppose, to allow them to
but it's taking further what I said, which is lovely, because rather than just talking about the trivialities, actually talking about my struggles and what I do. And again, that's very, very validating. I remember once there was a student on teaching practice who was having a terrible time. And I called her up. I said, I just have to tell you a story. And I was running the teacher training college. In my first teaching practice, I'm originally from Birmingham, and I was living in London, and the teaching practice was in Camden Town. And I was supposed to go home to Golders Green. I took the train from Camden Town to Euston. I got on the train to Birmingham, and I sobbed all the way home. And I went home and I said, that's it. I'm not doing anything. I'm hopeless. And no, not you, Mrs. Nemeth. Yes, me. I haven't made that up. I think because I put in the detail, they could see I hadn't made it up. And as you say, she went back with a spring in her step. I could do this. So yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to say how maybe they'd apply it, or maybe there's some light bulb moments gone on in terms of how they might temper their tutoring, where they're going from here? Okay, I promised you a technique. And this technique is very, very motivating. It's called future basing. Now, you can only do future basing when you've established a relationship. Otherwise, they're not going to trust you and they're not going to listen to you. And what you do is as follows. So I'm going to do it through a scenario. So you have a child starting in September. You give yourself a few weeks to establish the relationship. And then in October, you do this future basing. And what you say to them is, I want you to think about, if everything goes your way, if we manage to do really well on the tutoring, get your coursework in on time, you get good questions on your exam, what's the best mark you can get? I'm not looking at it, just write it down. Now, hopefully they have written down something that's quite high. Do you want to share it? Do you want to share it? In fact, you don't have to share it. Right. It's now August the 25th. And well, it used to be, now it's the email. An email pops up in your inbox with the results of the English GCSE. And you get that grade 8 that you predicted. They have to smile. How are you going to feel? So 1 is the prediction. 2 is the feeling. How does it feel together. It's very important for them to touch feelings. Describe how you feel. The next thing is, what do you do next? You want them to live the moment. I phone my friend. I tell my mum, whatever it is. Okay. So now they've lived the moment. Let's see what we need to do in order for you to get there. So if the exam is going to be in May, what do you need to have completed by Easter? Let's write it down. Let's redo it. You can spend an hour on this. It's worth it. So if you need to do that by Easter, what do you need to have completed before Christmas? And I'll write it down. So if you've done this by Christmas, what do you need to have done by half term in the autumn term? And basically what you've done is you've drawn out of them a plan of action to reach their anticipation of success. It's really lovely, because very often they say, well, I'd love to get that 8, but I don't know how to get there. And it's not good enough for us. Don't worry, kids, I'll get you there. You need them to take ownership and write it down and do a ready reckoner. So when it comes to half term and the autumn term, are we there? If we're not there, what are we going to do about it? Which is much nicer than you need to make a plan. You know, you need to make a plan. You need to make a timetable. If you don't make a time, no, that's awful. That's so boring. If you engage the emotion in what they're doing, you will engage the whole child. If you engage the emotion, you are building the relationship because they feel safe to tell you how they feel. I hope that was helpful. I hope you are going to be really, really successful with your tutors. Do look us up on maybe Julie will put it in the chat, alpdarko.co.uk. We do bespoke courses, as well as courses, all the ones on the website for the moment are now ending. We do school-wide courses, so a bit of a plug here. And also from the autumn, you're going to be able to access and buy a course from the website, so you don't actually have to sit at a fixed time. So please do check us out. I hope you found this helpful. And thank you, Julia and Ludo, for inviting me. And I hope it met your expectations.
Judith, thank you so much. Thank you. That was really, really lovely. And the noise in the background was lovely too. Good. Because it was it's the background of the same story of we're okay and all boats rise with the tide.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for encouraging us to look for the positivity and to build on the strengths as well as the weaknesses. It made a big difference for us. Thank you. Thanks for the affirmation.
Good luck with the rest of it. Bye bye, everybody.
See you soon.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
She's going to ring the bell now.